Later, days later, weeks later, in the interviews and the articles and the quiet conversations that followed, people who had been in that studio would try to describe the moment Steve Harvey stopped reading and could not continue. And none of them would land on the same words, because the moment was the kind that resists description, the way certain kinds of light resist being photographed. You could tell people it happened. You could tell them what came before it. You could tell them what came after. But the moment itself, Steve Harvey standing at the center of the stage with a piece of lined notebook paper in his hands, and his voice failing him mid-sentence for the first and only time in 14 years of hosting. That moment belonged to the people who were inside it, and the best the rest of the world got was the residue of it, which was considerable, but was not the thing itself. The boy's name was Isaiah David Fontaine. He was 8 years and 2 months old. He was from Shreveport, Louisiana. He had brown eyes and a gap between his 2 front teeth that he had been growing into for 6 months and had not yet fully closed. And he had arrived at the Family Feud studio on a Thursday morning in September of 2021 wearing a button-down shirt that his grandmother had ironed that morning and that he had already half untucked by the time the family reached the studio doors. And he had the letter in the front pocket of that shirt, folded 3 times, slightly crumpled at the corner where he had folded it too fast the night before, because he had been nervous and had had to do it over twice before he got it flat enough to fit. He had written the letter on a Wednesday evening at the kitchen table, while his mother thought he was doing homework. He had done the homework first. Isaiah was the kind of boy who did the homework first, who understood from very early that the things you wanted required the completion of the things that were required before them. And then he had sat at the table with a fresh sheet of paper and a pencil and had written for 22 minutes without stopping, which his mother Celeste had not noticed because she had been in the living room and had assumed the sounds of pencil on paper were the sounds of long division. They were not long division. To understand what Isaiah wrote, and why he had decided to write it, and why he had chosen this particular place to deliver it, you have to go back 2 years, to the September of 2019, when Isaiah was 6 years old and had just started first grade, and had come home on the 3rd day of school and sat down at the same kitchen table and told his mother, in the matter-of-fact tone of someone reporting an observable fact, that a boy in his class had called him stupid. Celeste had listened. She had asked questions. She had handled it the way she handled most things, with the organized calm of a woman who had been a licensed social worker for 12 years, and who knew that the first thing a person needed when they reported a hurt was to feel that the report had been received fully before anyone moved to solving it. She had received it fully. Then she had said what she believed to be true, that Isaiah was not stupid, that the word stupid was never accurate when applied to a child, and that some people used words as weapons because they had not yet learned to use them as tools. And it was not Isaiah's job to be injured by someone else's unfinished education. Isaiah had looked at her for a moment. Then he had said, "Is that why you became a social worker? Because of words?" Celeste had been quiet for a second. Then she had said yes. Yes, partly. And she had told him, for the first time in a form he was old enough to hold, about the words that had been used against her when she was young. Not the specific words, not yet, but the shape of the experience, the way a word could arrive like a stone and leave a mark that lasted longer than the moment of impact, and the way she had decided, somewhere in her teens, that if words could do that kind of damage, they could also do the opposite, and that she wanted to be someone who used them the second way. Isaiah had absorbed this with the focused silence he gave to things that mattered to him. Then he had gone to his room. 10 minutes later, he had come back with a piece of paper on which he had written, in his first grade printing, "Words can help." he had taped it to the refrigerator. Celeste had left it there. It was still there, 2 years later, slightly yellowed at the tape corners, on the refrigerator in the Shreveport kitchen when the family left for Atlanta. The words that had been used against Celeste. The specific words, the stone-shaped ones, the ones that had arrived in her childhood and left marks she had spent years learning to live alongside. Isaiah had learned about gradually, in the measured installments that Celeste believed were right for his age and his readiness. He had learned about them the way children learn about the true things. Not all at once, but in layers, each layer becoming available when the one beneath it had been sufficiently settled. By the time he was 8, he had a picture that was not complete, but was honest. And what he had done with that picture, in the way that children do things with the information that moves them most, was carry it into his understanding of who his mother was, and why she did what she did, and what it had cost her, and what it had made her. He was proud of her in the way that 8-year-olds are proud of their parents, completely, without irony, without the complicated negotiations that come later. He was proud of her the way he was proud of the refrigerator note, which he considered one of his better works. And somewhere, in the accumulation of 2 years of watching her go to work and come home and sit with him at the table and tell him true things about words and what they could do, he had developed a feeling that he could not fully articulate, but that pressed at him, the way important feelings press, until he did something about it. What he did was write the letter. He had been planning to write it since July, when the Family Feud application had been accepted and Celeste had told him they were going to Atlanta. He had thought about it for 6 weeks. He had started it twice and thrown both starts away. The version he wrote on Wednesday evening was the 3rd attempt and the first one that felt right, which he knew was right because when he read it back, he felt the same thing he felt when he read the words on the refrigerator. Not performed, not arranged, but found. The family that came to Atlanta was Celeste, Isaiah, Celeste's mother Nadine, who was 64 and had driven from Monroe specifically for this, and who had the quality of presence that some grandmothers have, which makes every room they enter immediately more organized. Celeste's brother Deshaun, who was 31 and worked as a paramedic, and had his sister's composure and their mother's directness, and Celeste's colleague and closest friend Tamara, who had been part of enough of Celeste's story to understand what the day meant, and who had said, when Celeste asked if she wanted to come, simply, "Try and stop me." The game was good. The Fontaine family was fast and warm and funny, and Steve Harvey had settled into them quickly, drawn to Nadine first and then to Isaiah, who had been watching him from the moment he walked out with the focused, inventory-taking attention that Steve recognized from experience as the signature of a child who was not here for the spectacle, but for something specific. He had crouched to Isaiah's level between rounds, the same geometry Chloe had required, the same recalibration that very small people demand from very tall ones, and asked him what he thought of the show so far. Isaiah had said it was good. Steve had asked what his favorite part was. Isaiah had considered this seriously and said, "The part where you ask people real questions." Steve had looked at him for a moment and then said, "You know what? That's my favorite part too." Isaiah had nodded, as if this confirmed something he had already suspected. Then he had reached into his shirt pocket. "I wrote you something," he said. Steve Harvey looked at the folded paper in the boy's hand. "For me?" he said. "It's about my mom," Isaiah said. "I thought you should know." The studio fell completely silent. Celeste had both hands pressed to her mouth. She had not known about the letter. She had not known there was anything in Isaiah's shirt pocket. She had ironed that shirt herself the previous evening, had laid it on the bed, and run the iron over the collar and the placket and the cuffs, with the focused attention she gave to the things she did for Isaiah. And she had not checked the pocket. Because why would you check the pocket of a shirt you are ironing for an 8-year-old? And now she was standing at the podium in an Atlanta television studio, finding out, along with 300 strangers and 4 camera operators and Steve Harvey, that her son had been carrying a letter for her in his front pocket all day, and had chosen this moment, this room, this man to give it to. Steve took the letter with both hands. He unfolded it carefully. 3 folds, slightly crumpled at one corner. He looked at it for a moment, then he began to read it aloud. Isaiah had written, in his 3rd grade printing, in pencil, on a single sheet of lined notebook paper. Dear Steve Harvey, my name is Isaiah and I am 8. My mom is Celeste, and she is a social worker. When she was little, people said bad words to her that hurt her. She decided to help people instead of being sad. Every day she goes to work and she helps people who have nobody. I think she is the bravest person I know. I think you should know about her because you ask real questions, and I wanted someone to ask her a real question today. She never talks about herself. She only talks about other people. I think that is wrong. She should be talked about too. Thank you for reading this. From Isaiah, age 8. Steve Harvey read as far as, I think she is the bravest person I know. Then he stopped. The studio fell completely silent. He lowered the letter. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, the way people look at ceilings when they are asking something of themselves that requires a moment's negotiation. Then he looked at Isaiah, who was watching him with the steady, patient expression of someone who has said what he needed to say and is now simply waiting to see what the world does with it. Give me a second, son, Steve said. Isaiah said, Okay. The studio fell completely silent. 14 seconds passed. A sound engineer near the mixing board later said it was the longest 14 seconds of dead air he had recorded in 19 years of live television production, and that he had not moved to fill it because filling it would have been the wrongest possible thing to do. Then Steve Harvey raised the letter and finished reading it. His voice was different for the last 4 sentences, lower, rougher, the way a voice gets when the mechanism of it is being asked to carry more than its usual load. When he read the last line, Thank you for reading this, from Isaiah, age 8, he folded the letter back along its 3 creases, slowly, and held it against his chest with one hand, flat over his heart, and stood that way for a moment before he said anything. Then he looked at Celeste. Your son wrote this, he said, last night, while you thought he was doing homework. Celeste made a sound that was not a word. She looked at Isaiah. Isaiah looked at his mother. He said, You should be talked about. The studio fell completely silent for the last time. Steve Harvey crouched in front of Isaiah. He held the letter out. Isaiah took it back. Steve put both hands on the boy's shoulders, gently, the weight of acknowledgement rather than instruction, and said the 5 words that went out across every camera in the building. You already use them right. Isaiah looked at him. Words, Steve said. Your mom taught you, and you used them right. Isaiah nodded once, the nod of someone receiving a confirmation they had been working toward without knowing what it would feel like when it arrived. But Steve wasn't done. He stood. He turned to the audience and said, I have been asked a lot of real questions in this building. I have never had one delivered to me in writing by an 8-year-old who planned it for 6 weeks. He looked at Celeste. Your son saw you, not the version of you that gets up and goes to work and comes home and makes dinner. The version that decided, when the words that were used against you could have made you smaller, to let them make you larger instead. He saw that version. He wrote it down, and he carried it in his pocket to a television show because he wanted someone to ask you a real question about it. He turned to Celeste directly. "So I'm asking," he said. "How are you doing? The real answer." Celeste looked at her son. Then she looked at Steve Harvey, and she told him the real answer. Not all of it, because some of it was still becoming, but enough. The childhood words and what they had cost. The decision she had made in her teens, and the years it had taken to make it stick. The 12 years of social work and the clients who had nobody, and what it did to her to be the somebody in those rooms. The tiredness of it, and the necessity of it, and the way she had never once regretted it, not for a day, and the way she had never talked about any of this to almost anyone because the people she worked with needed her attention, and the people she loved needed her steadiness, and there had never seemed to be a room left over in which she got to simply be seen. There was one now. 300 people were in it, and an 8-year-old boy had built it for her. But Steve wasn't done. He turned to the camera and said, "I want to talk to everyone watching at home. The people who give the most are almost always the people who ask for the least. The social workers, the nurses, the teachers, the parents. The people who make themselves available to the hardness of other people's lives every single day. They do not wave flags. They do not ask to be seen. They come home and make dinner and sit at the kitchen table and tell their children true things about words. And their children are watching. And sometimes, if you are very lucky, one of those children writes it down and carries it to a room big enough to hold it." The competing family, the Bryants from Birmingham, a 3-generation group who had played with warmth and lost with grace, sent their eldest, a woman named Clara, who was 67 and had spent 30 years as a school counselor, across the stage. She went to Celeste. She did not say anything elaborate. She said, "We see you." Then she looked at Isaiah. She said, "And we see you for seeing her." She went back to her family. The episode aired on November 16, 2021. The clip of Steve stopping mid-letter was viewed 15 million times in the first 72 hours. It was the most shared clip involving a child in the show's history. The National Association of Social Workers shared it across all their platforms. School counseling organizations, hospice organizations, and foster care advocacy groups shared it. A child psychology researcher at Emory University cited it in a paper on childhood emotional literacy as a case study in what she called witnessed empathy, the capacity of a child to not only feel for another person, but to act on that feeling in a concrete, deliberate, carefully prepared way. 3 months after the episode, Isaiah Fontaine was invited to speak, to sit in a chair on a small stage, the way Chloe Bridges had done before him, while a kind interviewer asked him questions, at a social work conference in New Orleans. He had worn the same button-down shirt, re-ironed by Nadine. He had answered every question with the same steady directness he brought to everything. He was asked what advice he had for adults. He had thought about it for 3 seconds and said, "Ask real questions, and wait for real answers. That's all." The room had been quiet for a moment. Then it had not been quiet at all. A year after the episode, Celeste Fontaine was promoted to clinical director of her agency, the first person under 40 to hold the position in the organization's 31-year history. She accepted the promotion in a meeting with her supervisor, who told her the board had noted, among her qualifications, her visibility following the episode as an example of the agency's mission made human. Celeste had nodded and said thank you, and gone back to her office and called Isaiah's school to make sure he had gotten there safely, the way she called every morning, because some things do not change when other things change, and this was one of the things that did not change, and would not. Today, the refrigerator note is still on the refrigerator. Words can help, in first-grade printing, yellowed at the tape corners, exactly where Isaiah put it at age 6. The letter, the one from the shirt pocket, the one Steve Harvey held against his heart, is framed on the wall of Celeste's office at the agency. Isaiah knows it is there. He has not visited the office yet. He is waiting until he is ready, which is how he approaches the things that matter most to him, and which is something he learned from his mother, who learned it from the years of sitting with the hardest things and waiting for them to become something she could carry forward rather than simply away. He is 8 years old. He already uses them right. The words he always has. If this story reached something in you, leave a comment right now telling us about someone in your life who gives everything and asks for nothing. Say their name. This is The Room. They deserve to be talked about. And subscribe, because every week we find a family like Isaiah's, and you should be here.